The blood-curdling scream pierced through the Montana wilderness, jolting David Cooper awake from his restless sleep. It wasn't human, no, this was something far more primal, a sound of pure maternal anguish that made his skin crawl. For 12 years as a wildlife veterinarian in these remote mountains, he'd heard every sound these forests could produce, but nothing like this. Through his frost-covered window, the October moonlight cast long shadows across the fresh snow. There it was again, that heart-wrenching cry, closer now, accompanied by a desperate scraping against the earth. If you want to witness an extraordinary tale of survival, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child that would challenge everything you thought you knew about wild animals, subscribe now and join us on this incredible journey. David's hands trembled as he fumbled for his flashlight, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air of his cabin. At 42, he'd left behind a successful veterinary practice in Denver to live in this secluded corner of Montana, seeking solitude and a deeper connection with the wildlife he had dedicated his life to protecting. But nothing in his years of experience had prepared him for what his flashlight beam revealed. Through the swirling snow, a massive grizzly bear, her fur caked with ice and blood, was dragging something toward his cabin. Her movements were deliberate, desperate, and what hit David hardest were her eyes. They held an intelligence and determination that transcended any natural fear of humans. As she moved closer, his heart nearly stopped. In her powerful jaws, she gripped the scruff of a badly injured cub, leaving a trail of blood in the pristine snow. The mother bear's eyes met his through the window, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. This wasn't just any injured cub being dragged through the snow. This was a mother's last desperate attempt to save her child. The way she deliberately approached his cabin, the way she looked at him with those knowing eyes, defied everything he had learned about wild animal behavior. David's mind raced back to that lecture hall in veterinary school, his professor's words echoing in his head, "Never, under any circumstances, interfere with a mother bear and her cubs. It's suicide." But as he watched the mother bear gently lay her cub at his doorstep, her eyes never leaving his, those academic warnings seemed hollow against the reality before him. The cub's breathing was shallow, its small body broken. Even from inside, David could see the severity of its injuries, deep gashes along its side, a leg bent at an unnatural angle, and blood matting its thick fur. The mother bear stood guard, swaying slightly from exhaustion, but her eyes remained fixed on David, pleading with an intelligence that shook him to his core. His cabin, once a symbol of isolation, now stood as a last beacon of hope for this desperate mother. The wind howled through the towering pines, the temperature dropping rapidly as the storm intensified. Mother and cub wouldn't survive the night in these conditions. Already, ice was forming on the mother's fur, her massive body trembling not from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. David's satellite phone, his only connection to emergency services, lay silent on his desk. Even if he could call for help, the nearest wildlife rescue was hours away. The storm would make any travel impossible. Whatever decision he made, he would make it alone. The mother bear let out another cry, softer this time, a sound so filled with desperation and love that it made David's chest ache. She nudged her cub gently, trying to keep it warm, but the small creature barely responded. Time was running out. Every instinct, every piece of training, told David to stay inside, to let nature take its course. But as he watched this mother, who had done the impossible by bringing her cub to a human for help, he felt the weight of a decision that would either mark him as a fool or change his understanding of these magnificent creatures forever. His hand rested on the door handle, the cold metal biting into his palm. The mother bear watched his every move, her breath coming in ragged clouds in the freezing air. In her eyes, David saw not a wild animal but a mother who had defied every natural instinct to save her child. She had chosen to trust him. The question was, would he trust her? The wind screamed through the trees, the snow falling harder now, beginning to cover the injured cub. The mother bear looked at David one last time, and in that moment, he saw something that would haunt him forever: acceptance. She had done everything she could. Now she was ready to die beside her cub if help didn't come. David's fingers tightened on the handle, everything he knew about wildlife, survival, and the barrier between humans and wild animals about to be challenged. The next few moments would either be the bravest or the last decision of his life. The mother bear watched, waiting as David took a deep breath and began to turn the handle. What happened next would challenge everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals and become a story that would be told around campfires for generations to come. A gust of bitter wind whipped through the cabin as David slowly opened the door, his heart thundering against his ribs. The mother bear remained motionless, her massive form silhouetted against the swirling snow, steam rising from her fur in the freezing air. In his 15 years of working with wildlife, he had treated countless bears, but always sedated, always in controlled environments, never like this. Never with a fully conscious mother bear standing mere feet away, her injured cub lying vulnerable between them. His mind flashed back to his last day at the Denver Wildlife Center just 8 months ago. "You're making a mistake, David," his colleague Sarah had warned, concern etching her features. "Living alone up there, no backup, no equipment, it's not just risky, it's reckless." Now, facing a desperate mother bear in the dead of night, her words seemed prophetic. The cub lay motionless in the snow, its small body trembling with each shallow breath. Even in the dim light, David's trained eye could see the severity of its injuries. Deep lacerations ran along its right side, the fur matted with frozen blood. Its back leg was badly broken, and there were puncture wounds that suggested a violent encounter, mountain lion, most likely. Without treatment, the cub wouldn't survive the night. The mother bear's behavior defied everything David knew about wild animals. She stood guard over her cub but made no aggressive moves as he inched closer. Her eyes, intelligent and alert despite her exhaustion, followed his every movement. There was something in that gaze that reminded him of his first bear encounter 20 years ago when he was just a rookie vet student, doing field research in Yellowstone. He'd been tracking a tagged female bear, observing her hunting patterns, when he witnessed something remarkable. The bear had spent hours fishing in a stream, but instead of eating her catch immediately, she carried each fish back to a hollow log where her cubs waited. The level of planning, the deliberate care she showed, it had challenged everything his textbooks said about animal intelligence. Now, as he watched this mother bear, he saw that same intelligence, but driven by desperate circumstances. The wind howled louder, driving sheets of snow against them. The mother bear swayed slightly, her strength clearly failing. The journey here must have been exhausting, dragging an injured cub through deep snow, fighting against the storm, choosing to approach a human dwelling despite every natural instinct. David's flashlight beam revealed more details of their condition. The mother's fur was caked with ice, and there were scratches on her face and chest, evidence of her fight with whatever had attacked her cub. She must have driven off the predator, but at a cost. Her own injuries, while not life-threatening, spoke of her fierce defense of her child. The cub stirred weakly, letting out a pitiful whimper that seemed to pierce the howling wind. The mother's reaction was immediate. She gently nuzzled her child, a soft rumble in her throat that David recognized as a comfort sound. In that moment, the barrier between human and wild animal seemed to blur. This wasn't just a bear protecting its young, this was a mother's love, pure and profound. His years of experience began to paint a picture of what must have happened. The tracks in the snow, though rapidly disappearing under fresh powder, told a story. The blood trail stretched back into the darkness, punctuated by places where the mother had stopped to rest, always positioning herself between her cub and the wind. She hadn't just randomly stumbled upon his cabin, she had deliberately sought it out. David remembered the bears he'd observed near his cabin over the past months. This mother and her 2 cubs had been regular visitors to the berry patches about a mile away. He'd watched them through his binoculars, documenting their behavior, noting how attentive the mother was, how she taught her cubs which berries to eat and how to dig for roots. But now he saw only 1 cub. The absence of the second hit him hard, another tragedy written in the storm. The mother bear's eyes never left him as he slowly knelt in the snow, medical instincts taking over as he assessed the cub's condition. Her behavior went against every documented case of bear-human interaction he'd studied. Mother bears were known to attack at the slightest threat to their cubs, yet here she stood, allowing him near her injured child. It was as if she understood, on some profound level, that he represented her cub's only chance for survival. A memory surfaced from his research days, a paper he'd read about ursine intelligence, dismissed by many as anthropomorphic speculation. The author had documented cases of bears displaying problem-solving abilities, far beyond what was traditionally attributed to them: tool use, strategic planning, even apparent emotional responses that mimicked human behavior. At the time, David had been skeptical. Now, faced with this mother's extraordinary actions, he wasn't so sure. The cub's breathing grew more labored, each exhale creating a tiny cloud in the freezing air. The mother bear made a sound deep in her throat, not a growl, but a moan of distress that made David's chest tighten. She looked at him again, and in her eyes, he saw something that would challenge his understanding of wildlife forever: trust. This massive predator, capable of killing him with a single swipe, was choosing to trust him with what she held most precious. Time was running out. The storm was intensifying, the temperature plummeting further. Inside his cabin, he had supplies, antibiotics, bandages, splints, everything he needed to treat the cub's injuries. But getting an injured cub and its protective mother inside went against every rule of wildlife management he'd ever learned. Yet as he watched the cub's life slowly ebbing away in the snow, he realized that sometimes survival required breaking the rules. The mother bear swayed again, her own strength failing. Ice had formed on her fur, and her movements were becoming sluggish, signs of hypothermia setting in. Whatever decision he was going to make, it had to be now. David stood slowly, his mind racing through options, calculations, risks. The mother bear watched him, waiting, her trust both a gift and a burden. The next few moments would either be a testament to the extraordinary bonds possible between humans and wildlife or a tragic reminder of why some boundaries should never be crossed. With trembling hands, David reached for his emergency medical kit inside the cabin door, his movements deliberate and slow. Each second felt like an eternity as he watched the mother bear's reaction. His mind raced through everything he knew about bear behavior, every case study he'd read, every encounter he'd documented. Nothing in his experience matched what was happening now. The cub's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Its breathing had become shallow and irregular, classic signs of shock setting in. The mother bear's eyes tracked David's every movement, but her usual protective aggression seemed tempered by exhaustion and what he could only describe as desperate hope. She made a soft chuffing sound, a communication signal he'd heard mothers use with their cubs. But this time, it seemed directed at him. "It's okay," David whispered, knowing his voice meant nothing to her but needing to break the tension somehow. "I'm going to help." The words felt inadequate against the gravity of what he was attempting. One wrong move, one misread signal, and he wouldn't live to regret his decision. The wind howled louder, driving snow and ice against him in horizontal sheets. His veterinary training screamed against every move he was making. Bears were supposed to be sedated before treatment, contained in proper facilities, and handled with specialized equipment. Instead, he was kneeling in the snow beside a critically injured cub while its mother stood guard. The absurdity of the situation would have made him laugh if the stakes weren't so high. David's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he opened his medical kit. The familiar tools, gauze, antiseptic, and bandages seemed woefully inadequate for the task ahead. He needed to examine the cub properly, clean its wounds, and set that broken leg, all while its mother watched, fighting against time and temperature that could kill them all. The mother bear suddenly tensed, and David's heart nearly stopped. But she wasn't looking at him. Her attention had snapped to the tree line, ears forward and nostrils flaring. Through the swirling snow, David caught a glimpse of movement. Something was out there. The mountain lion, back to finish what it had started. The mother bear let out a warning growl that vibrated through David's chest, her massive body positioning itself between the threat and her cub. This was his chance to retreat, to get back inside where it was safe, where the rules of wildlife management said he should have stayed all along. Instead, he found himself moving closer to the injured cub, his own instincts to protect overriding his training. The mother bear's attention remained fixed on the darkness beyond the snow, but he felt her awareness of his movements, her acceptance of his presence. The cub stirred weakly as David's hands gently explored its injuries. The broken leg was his biggest concern, a compound fracture, the bone likely shattered. Without proper surgery, the cub might never walk normally again. But first, he had to stop the bleeding, prevent shock, and get its temperature up, all while a potential predator lurked in the shadows and a storm raged around them. Years of experience had taught David to trust his instincts, but this went beyond instinct. This was either madness or something profound about the relationship between humans and wildlife that he'd never fully understood before. The mother bear's behavior defied everything he knew about wild animals. She wasn't just tolerating his presence, she was accepting his help, trusting him with her cub's life. A memory surfaced from his early days as a vet, a lecture about animal intelligence and emotion. His professor had shared controversial research suggesting that some animals possess levels of consciousness and emotional complexity, far beyond what science traditionally accepted. The paper had been dismissed by many as anthropomorphic wishful thinking. But now, as he worked to save this cub while its mother stood guard, he wondered if they'd all been too quick to dismiss those theories. The wind cut through his jacket like knives, numbing his fingers as he worked. The mother bear's warning growls had subsided, but her vigilance hadn't decreased. Whatever had been out there seemed to have retreated, driven away by her presence or the storm. But the danger was far from over. The cub's injuries were severe, and treating them here in the open was impossible. David made his decision. It went against every protocol, every safety guideline, and every rule he'd lived by in his career. But sometimes rules had to bend when faced with extraordinary circumstances. With careful movements, he began preparing to move the cub. The mother bear turned back to watch him, and in her eyes, he saw understanding. She knew what he was trying to do. His cabin's mudroom was small but warm, separate from the main living space. It could serve as a temporary medical station if he could convince a mother bear to let him take her cub inside. The very idea seemed absurd. Yet here he was, attempting the impossible. The cub needed immediate treatment, warmth, and proper medical care. It would die otherwise. And from the mother bear's behavior, she seemed to understand this. "I need to move him," David said softly, maintaining eye contact with the mother. Her intelligence shone in those deep brown eyes, an awareness that seemed to transcend the natural barrier between their species. She watched as he slowly gathered the cub in his arms, its small body terrifyingly still. The mother bear made a soft sound, something between a moan and a whimper, but she didn't interfere. Time seemed to stop as David stood cradling the injured cub. The mother bear's massive form loomed over him, her breath visible in the frigid air. One swipe of those powerful paws could end him instantly. Instead, she followed as he backed toward the cabin door, her movements careful, deliberate. The trust she was placing in him felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. As he reached the mudroom door, David faced a moment of truth. Everything he knew about wildlife medicine was about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. The mother bear stood watching, snow collecting on her fur as he prepared to cross a threshold that would either mark a miraculous breakthrough in human-wildlife interaction, or become his final, fatal mistake. The mudroom's warmth hit David like a physical force as he carried the injured cub inside. His veterinary training took over, mind cataloging symptoms and procedures, even as another part of him remained hyper-aware of the massive bear following him through the door. The space was cramped, never designed to house a full-grown grizzly. But the mother bear moved with surprising delicacy, her bulk somehow fitting into the small room. David's hands worked quickly, clearing his workbench of tools and laying down clean blankets. The cub's breathing had grown weaker, its small body cold to the touch despite its thick fur. Under the bright overhead light, the injuries looked even worse. Deep gashes ran along its flank, and the broken leg showed signs of infection setting in. The mother bear watched from barely 3 feet away, her presence filling the small space with an almost electric tension. "I need to clean these wounds," David spoke softly, not to the bear who couldn't understand but to steady his own nerves. He reached for his medical supplies, movements slow and deliberate. The mother bear's eyes followed his hands, but there was no aggression in her posture, only an intense focus that seemed almost human in its intelligence. Years of treating injured wildlife had taught David to work efficiently under pressure, but this was different. Usually, his patients were sedated and properly restrained. Now he was attempting to treat a critically injured cub while its fully conscious mother watched from arm's length. The absurdity of the situation hit him again, but he pushed it aside. Focus on the medicine, focus on saving this life. The first touch of antiseptic made the cub flinch and cry out weakly. The mother bear tensed, a low rumble in her throat, but didn't move. David's hands remained steady as he cleaned the wounds, though his heart raced. The cub's injuries told a story, the spacing of the puncture wounds, the tear patterns in the flesh, mountain lion, definitely. It probably caught the cub separated from its mother, though not for long, judging by the defensive wounds on the mother's face and chest. "You fought hard for your baby," David murmured, risking a glance at the mother bear. She met his gaze with those intelligent eyes, and for a moment he felt a connection that transcended species. This massive predator, capable of killing him instantly, was choosing to trust him. The responsibility of that trust weighed heavily as he turned back to his work. The broken leg was his biggest challenge. Without proper surgical equipment, he'd have to rely on basic field medicine. Setting the bone would be painful. The cub would cry out, and that would be the real test of the mother's trust. David had seen mother bears tear apart trees that their cubs got stuck in. What would this one do when her baby screamed in pain? "I'm sorry," he whispered, positioning his hands. "This is going to hurt." The mother bear seemed to sense his tension, moving slightly closer. David held his breath. Then, with practiced motions, he set the bone. The crack seemed deafening in the small room, followed by the cub's sharp cry of pain. The mother bear let out a stressed sound but still didn't interfere. Her restraint was extraordinary, defying everything David knew about wild animal behavior. Working quickly, he splinted the leg and wrapped it securely. The cub had fallen unconscious again, but its breathing seemed stronger, more regular. The warm air was helping, color slowly returning to its gums, a good sign. David moved on to the deep gashes, cleaning them thoroughly and applying antibiotics. Some would need stitches, a delicate procedure under any circumstances, let alone with a mother bear breathing down his neck. As he worked, David's mind wandered to the research papers he'd read about ursine intelligence. Studies suggesting that bears possessed emotional complexity comparable to primates, showing problem-solving abilities that challenged traditional views of animal consciousness. He'd been skeptical then, but now the mother bear's behavior, bringing her cub to his cabin, allowing him to treat it, understanding the necessity of pain for healing, seemed to support those controversial theories. Hours passed in a strange, tense rhythm: clean, stitch, bandage, monitor breathing, check pulse. The mother bear remained a constant presence, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to soothe her cub when the pain caused it to stir. David found himself talking softly as he worked, explaining procedures that couldn't be understood, offering reassurances that transcended language. Dawn was breaking when David finally stepped back, exhausted but satisfied. He'd done everything possible. The cub's condition had stabilized, breathing regular, temperature normal, wounds cleaned and bandaged, the broken leg properly set and splinted. Now it was up to the cub's natural healing abilities and its will to live. The mother bear had settled herself in the corner of the mudroom, her massive body somehow making the space seem smaller and larger at the same time. She watched as David gently lifted her cub onto a makeshift bed of blankets near her. The small creature stirred slightly, letting out a weak sound. The mother immediately responded with a soft chuff, reaching out to gently nose her baby. David stepped back, his own exhaustion finally hitting him. He'd done the impossible, treated a critically injured bear cub while its mother watched. The experience challenged everything he thought he knew about these magnificent creatures. The mother bear's behavior suggested levels of intelligence and emotional complexity that would make any wildlife researcher question their assumptions. The first rays of sunrise filtered through the mudroom's small window, casting a golden glow over the scene. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine snow and ice-covered trees. Inside, mother and cub rested together, their breath creating small clouds in the cool air. The mother bear's eyes met David's one last time, and in them, he saw something that would forever change his understanding of wildlife: gratitude. As he quietly closed the door between the mudroom and his cabin, David knew he was part of something extraordinary. This wasn't just about saving a bear cub's life, it was about bridging the gap between humans and wild animals, about trust and intelligence that defied scientific explanation. The next few days would be crucial for the cub's recovery, but something told him this story was far from over. The days that followed took on a surreal quality as David found himself playing host to the most unusual patients of his career. Through the small window between his cabin and the mudroom, he watched a remarkable transformation unfold. The mother bear, massive and powerful, showed a gentleness that touched him deeply as she tended to her recovering cub, never straying more than a few feet from its side. Each morning brought new challenges and revelations. The cub's recovery progressed slowly but steadily, its natural resilience aided by youth and David's careful treatment. The first time it tried to stand, wobbling on 3 legs while keeping the splinted one carefully raised, the mother bear's reaction was extraordinary. She hovered nearby, making soft and encouraging sounds, her body tense as if ready to catch her baby if it fell. David documented everything, filling notebook after notebook with observations that would challenge conventional understanding of bear behavior. The mother's intelligence continued to amaze him. She quickly learned the routine of treatment times, moving aside when he entered with fresh bandages and medicines. She watched his procedures with an intensity that suggested not just tolerance but understanding. "You're rewriting everything we know about bear intelligence," he murmured one morning as he changed the cub's bandages. The mother bear tilted her head at the sound of his voice, a gesture so human-like it gave him pause. Over the days, she had grown accustomed to his presence, even seeming to welcome it. When the cub's pain medications wore off and it grew restless, she would look to him expectantly, understanding somehow that he could help ease her child's suffering. The cub's personality emerged as it grew stronger. Despite its injuries, it displayed the natural curiosity of a young bear, attempting to explore the mudroom on wobbly legs, investigating David's medical supplies with cautious paws. The mother watched these adventures with what could only be described as maternal pride, intervening only when the cub's enthusiasm threatened to undo its healing progress. One particularly memorable morning, David entered to find the cub had somehow managed to climb onto his workbench during the night. Instead of panic or aggression, the mother bear looked at him with what he could have sworn was embarrassment, gently collecting her adventurous offspring and returning it to its bed of blankets. The incident struck David as so remarkably similar to a human parent dealing with a mischievous child that he had to remind himself these were wild animals. 2 weeks into their stay, David witnessed something that brought tears to his eyes. The cub, growing stronger daily, had been practicing standing for longer periods. This morning, it managed several steps without falling, its splinted leg holding steady. The mother bear's reaction was profound. She made a soft rumbling sound deep in her throat, not her usual vocalizations, but something David had never heard before. It was a sound of pure joy. His research notes were filled with observations that would seem unbelievable to his colleagues. The mother bear's ability to distinguish between different medical supplies, her understanding of treatment schedules, and her apparent comprehension of cause and effect in the healing process. It all suggested levels of intelligence far beyond what science currently attributed to bears. The bond between mother and cub deepened visibly during their recovery time. David watched as they developed their own forms of communication, subtle movements, specific sounds, and expressions that conveyed meaning between them. The mother's dedication never wavered. She would forego food if her cub was uncomfortable, focus completely on any sign of distress, and celebrate every small victory in the healing process. Perhaps most remarkable was the trust that developed between David and his unlikely guests. The mother bear began to show signs of recognizing his moods, responding differently when he was tired or worried. She would shift position to give him better access to her cub during treatments, sometimes even using her massive paw with incredible gentleness to help hold a bandage in place. "You know exactly what we're doing here, don't you?" David asked one evening as he checked the cub's healing leg. The mother bear met his gaze steadily, and in that moment, he felt the weight of everything he had learned about these magnificent creatures. Their intelligence wasn't just about problem-solving or survival skills, it encompassed emotional complexity, social understanding, and a capacity for trust that defied conventional wisdom. The mudroom had become a sacred space, a unique intersection of human and wild where traditional boundaries blurred. David found himself talking more openly to his patients, sharing his thoughts and observations. The mother bear would listen with what seemed like genuine attention, her eyes following his movements, her responses suggesting an understanding that went beyond mere animal instinct. 3 weeks into their stay, David began to notice subtle changes in both bears' behavior. The cub's strength had returned significantly, its wounds mostly healed, and its broken leg now bearing weight for short periods. The mother bear, while still attentive, showed signs of restlessness. She would stand at the mudroom's outer door, scenting the air, her natural instincts calling her back to the wild. David knew their time together was drawing to a close. The thought filled him with both joy and sadness, joy at the successful recovery and sadness at losing this extraordinary connection with these remarkable creatures. His research notes would challenge conventional understanding of bear behavior, but the most profound impacts of this experience were the things that couldn't be captured in scientific observations. One morning, as he changed the cub's bandages for what he suspected would be one of the last times, the mother bear did something unprecedented. She gently reached out and touched his arm with her paw, a gesture so careful, so deliberate, that David froze in amazement. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw a depth of intelligence and emotion that would forever change his understanding of these magnificent animals. The time for their departure was approaching, and David found himself preparing not just practically but emotionally. These bears had shown him something profound about the capacity for trust, intelligence, and connection between species. As he watched them through the window that evening, the mother tenderly grooming her now healing cub, he realized that some of the most important lessons about wildlife couldn't be found in any textbook or research paper. They had to be experienced firsthand in moments of extraordinary trust and connection. The morning they left dawned crisp and clear, the early spring sun casting long shadows across the fresh snow. David stood in his cabin, watching through the window as the mother bear led her cub through their morning routine one last time. The transformation from that desperate night was remarkable. The cub now moved with growing confidence, its splinted leg bearing weight, its wounds healed, the barely visible scars beneath its thickening fur. The mother bear seemed to sense the significance of the day. She was more alert, her movements purposeful as she guided her cub through gentle exercises they had developed during their stay. The young bear, nearly twice the size it had been when they arrived, tested its healing leg with cautious steps. Its natural playfulness had returned, though tempered by a peculiar awareness of its own limitations, something David had never observed in wild animals before. "It's time," David whispered, more to himself than to his patients, as he opened the mudroom's outer door. The fresh mountain air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and wilderness. The mother bear lifted her head, nostrils flaring as she caught the familiar smells of her natural habitat. The cub, sensing the change, moved closer to its mother, looking between her and David with curious eyes. For a long moment, nothing moved. The mother bear's gaze met David's, and in that connection, he felt the weight of everything they had shared. This wasn't just about treating an injured animal, it was about trust, intelligence, and bonds that transcended the natural order. The mother bear had defied every instinct to seek his help, had trusted him with her most precious possession, and had shown levels of understanding that challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife. With deliberate movements, David began removing the cub's final bandages. His hands were steady, though his heart raced with emotion. The mother bear watched closely, just as she had during every treatment over the past weeks. She had learned to recognize his medical supplies, had understood the purpose of each procedure, and had shown patience and trust that still amazed him. The cub's leg, once shattered, had healed remarkably well. There would always be a slight irregularity in its gait, but it was strong enough for life in the wild. As David stepped back, the mother bear approached her cub, gently nosing the healed leg as if making her own assessment. Her soft rumble of approval brought a smile to David's face, one more example of her extraordinary intelligence. Outside, the wilderness beckoned. Spring was arriving in the mountains, bringing with it the abundance that would sustain the bears through their return to the wild. David had prepared for this moment, gradually reducing his intervention over the past week, ensuring both bears were ready for independence. Still, standing there in the doorway, he felt the profound impact of what they had shared. The mother bear made the first move, leading her cub toward the open door with gentle guidance. The young bear followed, its movements showing increasing confidence with each step. At the threshold, both bears paused. The cub looked back at David, and for a moment, he saw in its eyes the memory of their time together, the pain, the healing, and the trust that had developed. Then something extraordinary happened. The mother bear turned back, her massive form blocking the doorway. David's breath caught in his throat as she moved toward him. Every instinct told him to step back, but he held his ground, trusting in the connection they had forged. With incredible gentleness, she pressed her forehead against his chest for just a moment, a gesture of such profound meaning that David felt tears welling in his eyes. It was a goodbye that defied everything he had been taught about wild animals, everything he thought he knew about the barriers between species. In that moment, he understood that some bonds transcend the natural order, creating connections that can never be fully explained by science alone. The mother bear rejoined her cub, and together they stepped out into the morning light. David watched as they made their way across the snow-covered ground, their dark forms stark against the white landscape. The cub's gait showed only a slight hitch, a small reminder of how far it had come from that desperate night. The mother bear moved with renewed strength, her natural grace returned. But there was something different about her, an awareness, an intelligence that seemed heightened by their shared experience. At the edge of the forest, they paused one last time. The mother bear turned, meeting David's gaze across the distance. In her eyes, he saw not just intelligence but something deeper, a connection that would challenge his understanding of wildlife forever. Then, with a gentle nudge to her cub, she disappeared into the trees, leaving only tracks in the snow as evidence of their extraordinary time together. David stood at the door long after they had gone, his mind full of everything he had learned. His research notes would challenge conventional wisdom about bear behavior, suggesting levels of intelligence and emotional complexity that many would find hard to believe. But the most profound lessons couldn't be captured in scientific observations. They lived in the moments of trust, in the gentle touches, in the shared understanding that had developed between human and bear. In the years that followed, David would sometimes see bears in the distance and wonder if they were his former patients. He never approached them, never tried to recreate that unique connection. Some experiences, he learned, were meant to be singular, precious moments when the natural order shifts just enough to reveal the extraordinary possibilities that exist between species. The mother bear had taught him more than just the depth of bear intelligence. She had shown him that trust, when freely given and honored, could bridge gaps that seemed insurmountable. Her dedication to her cub, her ability to understand and accept human help, and her final gesture of goodbye, all of it spoke to a complexity of consciousness that science was only beginning to understand. As spring fully arrived in the mountains, bringing new life and new beginnings, David often found himself thinking about that remarkable pair. Their story had changed him, challenging his assumptions about wildlife and teaching him that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from formal research, but from moments of pure connection between species. In the end, he realized it wasn't just about saving a bear cub's life. It was about discovering the extraordinary capacity for trust, intelligence, and love that exists in the wild, waiting to be recognized by those willing to look beyond their preconceptions.